A weary Marine inherited a ruined house in Maine's snowy woods. That night, he lit a fire, the glow flickering over cracked walls, as his dog Max barked and clawed at a freshly patched corner of the kitchen floor. Beneath it, Frank uncovered a steel hatch stamped U.S. Treasury 1943. His aunt hadn't left him a ruin, she'd left a secret worth billions. But headlights soon pierced the snow, and killers closed in. If this story chills you, like, share, and subscribe for more tales of loyalty, faith, and redemption. Snow fell in slow, silent sheets across the hills of northern Maine. The forest of red maples stood bare, their branches clawing at the gray sky like the bones of an ancient cathedral. Through this frozen quiet, a lone pickup truck crawled along a narrow, half-buried road. Behind the wheel sat Frank Dillard, a man shaped by war and weather alike, broad-shouldered, mid-40s, his brown hair streaked with gray, his face rough-hewn from years of salt air and sandstorms. The lines around his eyes were cut deep, not by age, but by loss. He had served 20 years in the Marine Corps, seen deserts burn and comrades fall, and when the wars ended, he found silence more comforting than company. Beside him, in the passenger seat, lay Max, a German shepherd with black and white fur thick as winter moss. 4 years old and sharp-eyed, Max had once been a K-9 in Frank's unit, a soldier, not a pet. A thin scar ran beneath his left ear, a faint memory of shrapnel in Kandahar. His ears twitched to every sound, alert even as his head rested on Frank's arm. Between them stretched a quiet too familiar, the kind that soldiers shared after the fight was done, when words felt unnecessary and ghosts did all the talking. 2 days earlier, a letter had arrived at Frank's small house near Bangor, formal, yellowed at the edges, the handwriting deliberate. "We regret to inform you that Mrs. Evelyn Dillard has passed away. You are her sole heir." The name stirred something deep in him. Evelyn Dillard, his aunt, had raised him after the car crash that took his parents when he was 8. She'd been a woman of stone, tall, silver-haired, her posture always straight, her hands steady even in grief. She'd worked for the government once, he remembered, though she never spoke about it. The neighbors called her the Lady of Hollow Creek, half in respect, half in fear. He hadn't seen her in over 15 years. Now she was gone. And that house, was his. A place he remembered only in fragments. The smell of pine resin, the low hum of wind through stone, the sound of Evelyn's typewriter late into the night. The road ended in a wall of trees. Frank parked, turned off the engine, and stepped out into knee-deep snow. The cold bit through his flannel and into his bones, the kind of cold that reminded him of the Hindu Kush Mountains, clear, merciless, absolute. Max jumped down beside him, paws sinking, tail flicking once before falling still. They walked the last stretch on foot. The forest was silent, except for the crunch of boots and paws. Then, through the fog, the house appeared, or what was left of it. The stone house of Hollow Creek. Its roof sagged under the weight of decades. The chimney leaned like a weary soldier. Moss covered the stone walls in uneven veins, and the front door hung crooked from rusted hinges. As Frank approached, the wind funneled through the chimney and the old cracks, creating a sound eerily human, a slow, rasping exhale, like a sleeping giant's breath. Locals had called it the house that breathes. Now, hearing it himself, Frank understood why. It didn't sound haunted. It sounded alive. Inside, the air was cold and stale. Dust clung to every surface. Cobwebs stitched the corners like gray lace. Frank ran a gloved hand over the wall, leaving a streak on the stone. His boots echoed as he crossed the main hall. The house smelled faintly of oil and time, and beneath that, something earthy, something disturbed. He found the fireplace and stacked the driest wood he could find. When he struck the lighter, the flame caught slowly, then flared up, throwing orange light across the cracked plaster. He lit the fire, and the glow flickered across the stained, broken walls. The warmth crawled into the room like a timid ghost returning home. Max sat close, eyes locked on the dancing light. Frank lowered himself into an old chair. He looked at the framed photo on the mantel. Evelyn, younger, standing beside this same house, her expression distant, proud. "You always said you'd never leave it," he murmured. "Guess you kept your word." Max's growl broke the quiet. Low, uncertain at first, then sharp. He stood, hackles raised, nose pointed toward the kitchen. "What is it, boy?" Frank whispered, grabbing his flashlight. The beam sliced through the dark. The kitchen was empty, no footprints, no open window, just the steady drip of melted ice from the ceiling. Then Max moved to a corner and began pawing the floor, claws scraping stone. Dust rose, revealing a faint square patch, lighter than the rest. Frank knelt and touched it. The cement was newer, smoother. His palm came away with a trace of pale lime. Someone had repaired this recently. He stared at the patch. The rest of the kitchen had aged a century. But this was fresh. A repair that didn't belong. His pulse quickened. The house creaked in the wind. Or perhaps, in warning. Max whined softly, tail rigid, eyes flicking toward the door. Frank turned off the flashlight, listening. The fire popped in the next room, echoing down the hall like footsteps. The sound of wind through the chimney returned that long-drawn breath that made the house sound alive. He sat there in the dark, hand resting on Max's fur, heartbeat steadying with the rhythm of the fire. Somewhere deep inside, the Marine in him, the part that slept for years, stirred awake. Something about this place didn't fit the quiet story of an old woman's death. As the last ember cracked, Max's eyes caught the light, two sharp amber reflections watching the room. Frank rose, exhaled slowly, and looked around the dim walls. This house wasn't empty. It was waiting. And as the wind sighed once more through the stone, Frank felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The morning light over Hollow Creek was pale and brittle, the kind of light that seemed to come not from the sun but from the snow itself. Frank woke early, the fire long dead, the house colder than before. Max was already awake, sitting near the kitchen corner where the patched cement gleamed faintly in the dawn. Frank poured himself coffee from a tin mug, his breath curling in the air. He couldn't shake the unease, the feeling that someone had been there before him. Recently, he needed answers. In the town 10 miles south, the diner was the only place open. Its sign, Maggie's Place, hung crooked, half buried under frost. Inside, the smell of bacon and burnt coffee was a comfort he hadn't realized he missed. He took a seat by the window where he could see the street. Max waited patiently in the truck outside, his nose pressed against the glass. When the waitress approached, Frank noticed another woman sitting 2 tables away, her gaze fixed on him over the rim of her mug. She was in her mid-30s, slender, with light brown hair tied loosely and strands escaping around her face. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the winter light, but her eyes, gray with a hint of blue, were bright, analytical, constantly moving. She wore a wool coat and scarf, both a little too fine for this quiet town. When Frank caught her looking, she smiled politely and stood up, walking over with the cautious confidence of someone used to asking difficult questions. "Frank Dillard?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but steady. "I'm Dr. Rachel Moore. I heard you inherited the Dillard property in Hollow Creek." Frank frowned slightly. "News travels fast. I'm a historian," she said, sliding into the seat across from him without waiting to be invited. "I've been researching declassified military sites in Maine, old storage facilities, mostly from the 1942nd. Your aunt's name kept appearing in files connected to Operation Ironclad. The name hit him like a cold wind. She worked on something called that?" Rachel nodded. "She was listed as a senior engineer. Then, she vanished from every record after 1949. It's like she erased herself. I think she was part of the Strategic Storage Program vaults, meant to protect national gold reserves during the war. There were rumors of hidden deposits all over the country. Hollow Creek might have been one." Before Frank could respond, the bell over the diner door jingled. A man entered, shaking snow off his coat, a tall figure with square shoulders, graying beard, and the kind of stance that said, "Former military." His eyes, cold and narrow, scanned the room until they landed on Frank. He walked over. "Dillard," he said, extending a hand. "Sheriff Dale Morgan. I served with your aunt's friend, Captain Reeves, back in the day." His handshake was firm, his grip dry and warm. The sheriff's face carried the weight of a man who had seen too much but still believed in duty. The years had carved deep lines around his mouth, but his gaze was sharp, almost protective. Frank nodded. "You knew her?" "Not well, but she came into town often. Never talked much. Always paid in cash." Dale lowered his voice. "2 days before she died, someone came asking about her, said they were from the Department of Energy. No ID, no record. My gut says they weren't government." Rachel looked between them. "Whoever they were, they wanted something from her." Dale nodded grimly. "And now you've inherited it." Frank's hand tightened around his coffee mug. "I just want to clear her name. She wasn't hiding gold or secrets." Rachel leaned forward slightly. "Maybe not hiding them, maybe protecting them." They talked for nearly an hour. Rachel shared what little she had: maps, declassified reports, and a few blurred photos of military engineers in front of steel vaults marked Ironclad Unit North. Evelyn Dillard stood among them, younger, serious, eyes fixed on the camera, with something between pride and fear. Frank couldn't look away. When they left the diner, the sky had turned the color of lead. Frank opened the truck door, and Max jumped out, tail low but wagging faintly. The dog sniffed the air, then stopped abruptly, growling toward the tree line across the street. A black pickup sat idling there, engine running, windows fogged from the inside. No driver, no movement. Dale followed Frank's gaze. "That truck's been parked there all morning," he said. License plates half covered with snow. He reached for his radio, but before he could speak, the truck's headlights flared bright. Then, without warning, it rolled backward into the forest trail and vanished into the white haze. Frank felt the hair on his neck rise. "Guess the house isn't the only thing watching us." Dale exhaled, hand resting on his holster. "If someone wanted that house, they'd be smarter to wait till dark." Rachel shivered. Or maybe they already have. When Frank and Max returned to Hollow Creek that evening, the snow had deepened and the forest was whispering again. The house stood in silence, its windows glowing faintly with the last light of day. As he opened the door, Max darted forward, barking at the fireplace. There, beside the ashes, something metallic gleamed under the embers. Frank reached down and pulled it free. A small brass tag, blackened by soot, engraved with the words, U.S. Strategic Storage 1943. He turned it over in his palm. It was cold as ice, heavy as memory. He looked at Max, then at the dark ceiling beams above. Hollow Creek had kept its secrets for decades. Now, it was starting to speak again. By the next evening, the storm had thickened into a steady white curtain. The world outside the stone house disappeared, leaving only the faint hum of the wind between the trees. Frank sat in the dim light of a single oil lamp, sleeves rolled up, the room heavy with dust and memory. He had decided to start cleaning Evelyn's study, the one room that still seemed to hold her presence. The air was dry, tinged with the faint smell of varnish and old ink. Papers were piled everywhere, engineering drafts, government forms, even ration coupons yellowed with age. Max lay by the door, ears twitching each time the wood popped in the fireplace. Frank moved a cabinet aside and froze. Behind it, half hidden by cobwebs, was a small iron grate leading into the chimney wall. He reached in, fingers brushing something metallic. It was a tin box, cold and rusted at the hinges. When he pried it open, a thin layer of dust rose into the air, revealing a leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked, the initials E.D. burned faintly into the corner. He turned the first few pages, neat handwriting filled with formulas and notes in military shorthand. The ink had bled in places, but the words were still legible. Testing secure conduit. No. 4 complete. Storage under Western Foundation stable. Beneath that, a line that made his chest tighten. Trust no one. They already know. He turned to the final page. The handwriting was different, shakier, almost desperate. If anyone finds this house, keep silent. Beneath the floor lies the heart of America. The pen stroke ended abruptly, trailing off into a blot. A sound cracked the silence, the lamp flickered, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. Max barked once, low and tense. Outside, through the frost-covered window, Frank saw a flash headlights slicing through the snow, then darkness again. Someone was out there, watching. He grabbed his flashlight and crossed to the window. The beam caught only drifting flakes and the edge of the tree line. Then, just faintly, a shadow moved. It wasn't an animal. The shape was upright, human, standing motionless for several seconds before slipping back into the forest. Max growled deep in his throat, fur bristling. Frank's instincts returned, sharp and automatic. Whoever it was, they knew he was here. A knock echoed from the front porch firm, deliberate. Frank raised his pistol before opening the door. Standing outside was an old man, wrapped in a thick wool coat, a lantern in one hand. His face was weathered, framed by white hair and a beard trimmed close. His eyes, though tired, were alert, the eyes of someone who had once trusted the world too much and paid for it. "Evening," the man said calmly. "Name's Jonas Wyatt. I used to work for your aunt, back when she was still building this place." Frank lowered the gun slightly but didn't holster it. "You picked a bad night for a visit." Jonas smiled faintly. "Ain't a much choice. Sheriff told me you were up here. Thought you should know your aunt wasn't the only one interested in this house." He stepped inside slowly, glancing around the room like a man entering a church. "I helped pour the foundation back in the 40s. But one night, she stopped me from working in the kitchen wing, told me never to touch that floor again, paid me double, and said it was for the country's good. I didn't ask questions." Frank motioned toward the chair. Jonas sat, rubbing his calloused hands together. The lantern light revealed more the deep creases around his eyes, the faint tremor in his fingers. "You believed her?" Frank asked. "Didn't have to," Jonas said quietly. "But I saw the trucks, government plates, night deliveries, no lights, men in uniform, but not army. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't simple construction." Before Frank could respond, the sound of tires crunching snow echoed from outside. The door burst open, and Sheriff Dale Morgan stepped in, rifle slung over his shoulder, coat flecked with ice. "Frank," he said breathlessly, "you've got company. Found tracks circling the house military pattern. Recent." He pointed at the floor, where wet boot prints led from the porch. "They've been watching you since yesterday." Frank handed him the brass tag he'd found. "You ever seen anything like this?" Dale turned it over, under the light. The engraving read, U.S. Strategic Storage 1943. He frowned. "That's government issue, World War II era. Used for marking supply caches and secure zones, but this one's been cleaned. Recently." Max barked again, this time toward the back door. Frank and Dale exchanged a look. They moved quickly through the narrow hallway, guns drawn, their boots quiet on the cold wood. Outside the window, something scraped against the stone wall. Frank swung the light claw marks etched deep into the outer wall, long and erratic, cutting through the old mortar. "An animal?" Dale whispered. Frank shook his head. "No animal does that high up." Jonas joined them, lantern trembling in his grip. "They're searching," he said softly. "Whoever killed Evelyn, they're still looking for what she hid." The wind picked up, moaning through the cracks of the old chimney, blending with the distant howl of a wolf. It rose and fell like a voice, one that didn't belong to the living. Frank stood in the middle of the hall, the journal pressed to his chest, the words repeating in his mind, "Beneath the floor lies the heart of America." Outside, somewhere in the woods, headlights flashed once more, then vanished into the snow. Snow hammered the roof in uneven bursts as night sank over Hollow Creek. The storm seemed alive now, pressing its weight against the old stone house, whispering through the gaps in the window frames. Frank stood over the kitchen floor, the journal open beside him on the counter. The final page was marked with Evelyn's trembling handwriting and a faint map sketched in pencil, a cross drawn exactly beneath where Max had scratched days ago. Rachel stood beside him, her breath clouding in the cold air, flashlight steady in her gloved hand. Jonas knelt on the floor, his old knees creaking as he traced the map's outline with a finger that still bore the memory of hard labor. "Here," Jonas murmured, tapping the corner where the cement looked different. "She poured this herself. I remember her working late after the crew was gone. Said it was her final reinforcement." His voice held a strange reverence, like he was remembering something holy. Frank fetched a crowbar from the hallway closet and began to chip away at the patch. The sound of cracking cement echoed through the empty house, mingling with the storm outside. Max lay low near the doorway, ears pinned back, eyes tracking every sound. After several strikes, a metallic clang answered. Frank cleared the debris, and there it was. A steel hatch, buried beneath the stone, its hinges coated in frost, stamped faintly with the words, "Ironclad secure." Rachel knelt beside it, brushing dust away with her scarf. "This isn't just a vault," she whispered. "It's part of a containment system. These locks were designed for war assets, gold, munitions, or classified archives." My God, Evelyn was guarding it. Frank gripped the handle, heaved, and the seal broke with a hiss. A rush of cold metallic air poured upward, sharp and dry like the breath of something long entombed. They descended the narrow stairs one by one, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The passage was lined with steel, beams, the walls, glistening faintly where condensation had frozen into thin crystals. At the bottom, their lights revealed rows of crates stacked along the walls, their stenciled markings barely visible beneath decades of grime. U.S. Treasury, 1943. A flag emblem flaked on one side. The place smelled of rust and dust, but beneath it all was something sterile, industrial, like the scent of machines that had once hummed with purpose. Rachel's voice trembled as she whispered, "This is real." Every historian thought Ironclad was a myth. She reached into her coat, pulling out her phone to take pictures. These were meant to be backup reserves during the war. The government must have lost track of them after the Cold War. Jonas took off his cap, eyes wide, his weathered hands trembling slightly. "She wasn't protecting gold," he said softly. "She was protecting history." Frank moved closer to one of the crates. Its lid was bolted shut, but through the crack saw dull reflections of bars stacked neatly inside. Not all gold. He realized some had odd engravings and serial numbers, unlike any modern currency. His mind ran through possibilities: secret weapon funding, hidden war assets, or worse, proof of something that should have stayed buried. A sudden metallic bang echoed from above, the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut. Frank looked up, flashlight trembling against the steel ceiling. "That wasn't the wind," he said. Rachel turned toward the stairs. "Someone's up there." Frank motioned to Jonas. "Stay here with Max." He climbed the narrow passage, muscles tense. When he reached the kitchen, the temperature had dropped further. The windows, once open, were now sealed tight with frost from the inside, as if someone had pressed the air out of the room. Then came the low growl of an engine outside, heavy, deliberate. Through the curtain of snow, headlights burned white against the forest. A black truck rolled up the slope, stopping just beyond the porch. Another followed, and then a third. Men climbed out, 6 of them, silhouettes in tactical winter gear, their breath fogging through black masks. One man stepped forward, his posture rigid, his presence unmistakable. He was tall, built like an iron beam, with close-cropped dark hair streaked gray at the temples. His jaw was scarred, one side pale and uneven, like it had once been burned. Silas Creed. Frank had seen his type before, the soldier who never stopped fighting, the man who carried war inside him even when peace returned. Creed's eyes were cold, methodical, but behind them was a glint of calculation, not rage. He spoke with the calm tone of someone used to being obeyed. "Mr. Dillard," he said, his voice carrying clearly over the storm, "I believe you've found something that doesn't belong to you." Behind him, the men fanned out in a semicircle, rifles slung but ready. From behind Frank, the door creaked. Again. Sheriff Dale Morgan stepped into view, rifle in hand, his badge glinting faintly in the dim firelight. "Silas Creed," he said evenly. "Didn't think I'd ever see your face again." Creed smiled, a hard, humorless thing. "Still pretending to serve justice, Dale? You always did like your lost causes." Frank's hand tightened on the pistol hidden behind his back. Rachel appeared at the stairwell, pale under the flashlight beam. Dale shifted his stance subtly, his eyes locked on Creed's men. The air grew taut, heavy as the storm outside. Then the engine of the last truck roared louder. Creed lifted his gloved hand and gestured once. "Seal the perimeter," he ordered. "No one leaves this property." The sound of boots crunching snow filled the air as his men spread through the yard. Inside, the old house groaned, as if aware that its secrets had finally been found and would not be given up easily. The storm had grown heavier, burying the valley in white silence while the house groaned under the weight of snow. Down in the basement, the cold was sharper, tasting of iron and dust. The dim light of a flickering lantern illuminated 4 figures gathered around the steel crates. Frank stood closest to the old generator, its metal casing dented and coated with grime. Rachel's breath fogged as she studied Evelyn's journal, tracing every line like scripture. Jonas sat near the steps, shotgun across his knees, the look of a man who'd spent his life building things others later destroyed. Max paced restlessly, nose low, tail rigid, his instincts prickling before danger that reason couldn't yet name. Frank pulled the lever on the generator, and after several stubborn clicks, it roared to life. Sparks jumped, and the lights along the ceiling flickered on one by one, casting the room in pale yellow. Somewhere in the distance, a mechanical hiss answered the sound of a sealed mechanism releasing. Rachel looked up. "You just turned on something, Frank." He frowned, eyes scanning the concrete wall at the far end, where a faint outline of a door had appeared. Its hinges groaned under decades of rust when he pressed his hand against it. Slowly, it opened. A cold draft flowed out, dry and metallic. The air smelled like the inside of a buried ship. They followed the corridor, flashlights cutting through the dust. The walls were lined with pipes and forgotten machinery. At the end was a small control room, its panels still alive with a soft green glow. Cables coiled across the floor like sleeping snakes. On one of the chairs sat a man, head bowed, wrapped in an old military jacket with a faded insignia. His hair was dark and unkempt, streaked with silver, beard rough and days old. He raised his head slowly, revealing tired but steady eyes the color of ash. "Don't shoot," he said hoarsely. "If you're with Creed, you're already too late." Frank kept his weapon ready. "We're not with Creed. Who are you?" "Carter Linwood," the man replied, his voice low but firm. "Used to be ViperSec. Not anymore." He looked around the room like a ghost in a place he'd once lived. "Your aunt found me years ago. I was stationed in Kosovo, part of a recovery unit. Things went wrong. I refused Creed's orders, so he left me for dead. Evelyn found me later, pulled me out of that hole, gave me a reason to believe people could still be good." Rachel stepped closer. "Creed's still out there. He's after the gold." Carter's expression hardened. "Not gold leverage. Those bars were collateral for an energy consortium. He plans to sell the coordinates to foreign investors. You stop him, you stop another war." Jonas cursed under his breath. "Another damn war built on greed." Frank studied the man carefully. Carter's hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from exhaustion and something else. Guilt. Why are you still here? Frank asked. I've been waiting, Carter said simply, for someone who could finish what she started. He stood, wincing at the stiffness in his leg. The limp was old, the kind that never healed right. You've got company outside. Creed's men are setting up comms jammers. Once they're online, your signal's gone. Rachel grabbed her laptop, fingers moving fast over the keys. Then I better send everything now. The hum of the generator deepened as she linked into the old communication port. Lines of green text scrolled across the cracked monitor, encryption, codes, frequencies Evelyn had written decades ago. If I can piggyback the old ironclad network, I can transmit a distress code to any active military frequency still monitoring historical bands. Frank nodded, setting his rifle down beside the terminal. Do it. He turned to Dale and Jonas. Set up defense positions near the stairwell. If they breach the door, stall them as long as possible. Upstairs, faint thuds echoed, boots moving across the floorboards. The ceiling dust drifted down in small showers. Max growled, low and guttural. The storm outside had reached its peak, snow hammering against the windows like fists. The radio crackled suddenly, a faint signal breaking through the static. Copy. Ironclad distress. Coordinates. Then silence. Rachel exhaled sharply. It worked. The message is out. Frank tightened his jaw. Now we hold until they come. Outside, the first muted explosion shook the ground, a warning shot. Creed's voice carried faintly through a megaphone. Mr. Dillard, you have one chance. Open the vault, and we walk away alive. Frank looked at Carter, who met his gaze without flinching. He won't stop, Carter said quietly. He never does. The old house groaned again as the wind howled through its broken chimney. Somewhere in the darkness, Evelyn's secrets stirred, and the war she'd tried to bury began to wake once more. The first blast shook the foundation of the house, sending dust cascading from the beams like falling ash. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied to a weak, trembling glow. The air in the steel corridors thickened with the smell of oil and cold metal. Frank gripped his rifle, jaw tight, his breath visible in the frigid air. The old ironclad facility, silent for decades, had become a battlefield again. He could hear the muffled voices of ViperSec men outside, barking commands through static-filled radios. Somewhere above them, Creed's trucks idled, engines growling like beasts waiting to feed. Jonas Wyatt stood at the base of the stairwell, sweat glistening on his wrinkled brow despite the cold. His hands, rough and veined from years of labor, clenched the shotgun with surprising steadiness. The old builder had spent his life raising walls. Now he was ready to die defending one. Rachel crouched beside the generator, her laptop balanced on a crate, the green glow of encrypted data reflecting in her eyes. Max paced the corridor, fur bristling. The wound on his shoulder from earlier, now reopened, but ignored. The shepherd's chest heaved. His instincts screamed of danger before the humans could sense it. Carter Linwood was the first to move. He adjusted the strap on his rifle, his expression carved from exhaustion and resolve. His gray-flecked hair hung damp across his forehead, and blood darkened the torn sleeve of his jacket. He looked at Frank. They'll breach in under 2 minutes. You need to keep that data moving. His voice carried the calm certainty of a man who'd already made peace with what was coming. Frank nodded but said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Then it came. A thunderous explosion tore through the stairwell. Shrapnel screamed across the walls, sparks cascading like fireflies. Jonas fired once, twice, before a round caught him in the chest. He stumbled back, blood blooming against his shirt like a red flower. Frank lunged forward, catching him before he fell. "Get them out," Jonas gasped, his breath ragged. "Don't let them take it." His eyes dulled as he sagged against Frank's shoulder, and for a moment, the storm outside seemed to pause. Carter cursed under his breath and pulled a flash grenade from his belt. "Cover me," he said. Without waiting for an answer, he ran toward the corridor, hurling the grenade through the smoke. Light burst white-hot, disorienting the attackers. Gunfire answered. Carter ducked behind a column, firing back, drawing their attention away from the control room. "Come on, you bastards," he shouted, his voice echoing. For several long seconds, Frank heard nothing but the sharp rhythm of gunfire, then silence. Rachel's voice broke it. "Signal uplink complete," she said, her voice trembling. "Transmissions sent to external channels, military archives, and Elias Grant's secure node." She looked up at Frank. "If he's still active, he'll know what to do." Frank nodded, grabbing the detonator, the Deadman switch Evelyn had mentioned in her final journal note. It was a crude failsafe wired to the main terminal. If the vault fell into the wrong hands, everything inside would self-destruct after transmitting the full record. He pressed the activation key. Red lights blinked across the console like the pulse of a dying heart. "Time to go," he said. But as they turned toward the exit, Creed's voice rang out from the stairwell, deep, cold, unwavering. "You think you've won, Marine? You just buried the truth deeper than she ever did." He stepped into view, his scarred face half lit by firelight, rifle raised. Frank fired first. The recoil slammed against his shoulder. Creed staggered, a dark stain spreading across his chest. His hand reached for the wall, leaving a smear of blood before he fell. Eyes still open. Lips curved into a faint smile. The alarm screamed. The walls trembled. Flames licked through the shattered vents as the generator erupted in sparks. Smoke filled the chamber, choking and bitter. Frank grabbed Rachel's arm, pulling her toward the tunnel. "Move!" Max limped ahead, ears flattened, coughing on the acrid air. Behind them, the steel door of the vault began to close, slow and heavy, sealing the legacy of ironclad beneath a coffin of its own making. They burst into the night. The cold hit like a blade, snow swirling in ghostly spirals. The ground rumbled once more. Then the sound of an explosion split the sky, muffled and distant, as the house shuddered from within. Frank fell to his knees, clutching Max, whose fur was matted with blood. The shepherd whimpered softly, pressing his head against Frank's arm. "Easy, buddy," Frank whispered, voice breaking. "We did it. We kept it safe." His breath formed white clouds that vanished into the storm. Around them, flakes fell slower now, as if the world itself had paused to mourn. Somewhere, beneath the snow and stone, the last remnants of Operation Ironclad burned quietly, taking with them the secrets of war, greed, and a woman's final act of faith. 3 days later, the snow finally stopped. The valley of Hollow Creek lay silent beneath a pale morning sky, smoke still curling faintly from the ruins of the house. The government had arrived with armored trucks, floodlights, and questions that no one wanted to answer. The ironclad vault was gone, buried under ice and fire, but the data had already reached the world. Vipersec's survivors were handcuffed, faces pale under the glare of military lamps. For once, silence spoke louder than defiance. At the center of it all stood Elias Grant, a tall man in his 50s with a clean-shaven face, short silver hair, and the calm precision of someone who had spent his life navigating chaos. His dark coat bore the insignia of military intelligence, and though he spoke softly, people listened. Once a brilliant analyst turned whistleblower, Elias had seen too many secrets buried in the name of security. His voice carried the measured gravity of truth when he told reporters, "If not, for these people, the nation would have lost more than gold. It would have lost its honor." Cameras flashed. His words spread across headlines before noon. Far from the noise, Frank Dillard opened his eyes in a military hospital in Bangor. The sterile light above him felt unfamiliar. His left arm was bandaged, his ribs tightly wrapped, but the weight of survival was heavier than the wounds. Beside his bed, Max lay curled on a blanket, his shoulder covered in white gauze, breathing slow but steady. When Frank reached out, the dog's tail thumped weakly against the floor. He smiled faintly. "Good boy, you made it." The door creaked open. Rachel Moore entered quietly, wrapped in a long gray coat, her hair tied back, a newspaper folded under her arm. The exhaustion of sleepless nights lingered in her face, but her eyes, sharp and compassionate, still held warmth. She sat beside him without a word, handing him the paper. The headline read, "Marine exposes hidden war vault. Saved a nation's legacy." Beneath it was a photo of the burned remains of Hollow Creek and a grainy shot of Frank carrying Max through the snow. "They're calling you a hero," she said softly. Frank scanned the article, then folded it and set it aside. "Heroes don't bury history," he murmured. "They just make sure it's remembered." He looked toward the window, where daylight spilled across the floor. Evelyn kept her promise. Guess I had to finish it for her. Months later, spring touched Hollow Creek. The house had been rebuilt, stone by stone. Frank, now leaner and quieter, worked with Sheriff Dale Morgan, whose gray beard had grown thicker, but whose calm endurance hadn't changed. Together they replaced the last section of the roof, the smell of pine and wet earth rising in the morning air. Nearby, Rachel knelt in the soil, planting young purple maples in a neat line along the porch. Beneath the largest tree stood two modest markers, Jonas Wyatt and Carter Linwood, carved from smooth granite, simple and unadorned. As twilight settled, Frank lit the fireplace inside the restored house. The flame crackled, throwing warm light over the stone walls. Max lay beside him, fur glinting in the glow, eyes half closed but watchful as always. Above the mantel hung a photograph of Evelyn Dillard, cleaned and framed anew, her stern face softened by firelight. Frank stared at it for a long time before whispering, "A man can lose everything, but not his honor." Outside, the wind carried the scent of thawing snow. Hollow Creek was silent again, but this time, it was a peaceful silence, not the kind that hides secrets. For the first time in 50 years, the old house breathed warmth instead of ghosts. When the fire finally burned, steady inside the rebuilt house, Frank understood what his aunt had always believed, that miracles don't always come as light from the sky, but as courage born in the darkest hour. The treasure was never gold. It was faith, the kind that makes a broken man stand again and a wounded dog keep watch through the storm. Maybe that's what God gives us, not answers, but strength to keep going when we can't see the way. If this story touched your heart, share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to follow more stories of hope and redemption. And may God bless and protect all who still believe that even in ruins, miracles can rise and hearts can be reborn in His light.